Have you ever stopped to wonder what the true turning point is between those who age with absolute independence and those who end up becoming prisoners of their own bodies? Crossing the 60-year mark, many believe that physical decline and medication dependence are inevitable parts of destiny. But the science of extreme longevity reveals a much different and more intriguing reality. There is a silent biological milestone, an invisible filter that decides who will have the privilege of reaching 100 years with lucidity and who will spend the coming decades in hospital waiting rooms. The secret lies not in genetic luck, but in the strategic absence of 5 specific conditions that act as heavy anchors, pulling your vitality to the bottom. Ignoring these signals now is accepting a contract of frailty that will steal your dignity and your freedom of choice in the future. Imagine for a moment the possibility of crossing the next 3 or 4 decades with the same mental clarity you possess today, maintaining the strength needed to travel, carry your grandchildren, and manage your own life without asking anyone for permission. This vision is not an unreachable dream, but a powerful opportunity for health capitalization that opens up exactly at this moment in your journey. However, there is an ignored danger that conventional medicine often labels as normal for your age, but which is actually the precursor to a devastating systemic collapse. We are talking about cellular resilience that can be protected or destroyed by decisions you make every day, often without realizing the accumulated impact. This video is your definitive guide to understanding how to cross the 60-year barrier with a structurally intact organism, ensuring your old age is marked by power, not passive survival. Often, upon reaching the 6th decade of life, we are led to believe by doctors and family members that the onset of chronic pain, persistent fatigue, and the use of multiple medications are intrinsic and inevitable components of the natural aging process. This social normalization of frailty is in fact one of the biggest traps that can compromise your longevity, as it camouflages silent neglect that occurred during your 40s and 50s. What most people ignore is that the body does not fail suddenly. It emits subtle signals that are systematically disregarded until they transform into irreversible diagnoses of chronic diseases. By accepting the idea that falling ill is part of aging, you give up your power of early intervention and allow perfectly avoidable conditions to steal decades of your dignity and autonomy, transforming what should be the harvest phase into a period of logistical dependence. At the core of this critical biological transition at 60, invisible processes occur, such as low-grade chronic inflammation, technically known as inflammaging. This phenomenon acts as a persistent fire that silently consumes the integrity of your cells, facilitating the installation of pathologies that wait only for a gap in your immune system to manifest. Added to this, the body begins to face increasing metabolic resistance, where insulin signaling becomes slow and inefficient, resulting in a glycation process that acts like ground glass in your arteries and nerves. This vascular and nerve deterioration paves the way for the decline of vital organs, making the organism much more vulnerable to catastrophic events that could have been prevented with strategic metabolic management. Understanding that your body is crossing this decisive milestone is the first step toward taking total control over your own biology and longevity. Another crucial factor that intensifies after 60 is the immune system's loss of ability to identify and eliminate so-called senescent cells or zombie cells. These cells stop fulfilling their original function but remain in the body emitting toxic chemical signals that contaminate neighboring cells and accelerate the aging of entire tissues. Parallel to this, endothelial frailty and the accelerated decrease in bone and muscle density, driven by deep hormonal changes, create a scenario where the skeleton loses its protective armor and vessels lose their vital elasticity. This set of biological alterations is not just a statistic, but the real explanation for why millions of people lose their mobility silently and progressively. By understanding these changes, you stop being a passive observer of your aging and start acting as the architect of a resilient physical structure, capable of withstanding the demands of a century-long life with vigor. The central conflict that haunts most people when crossing the 60-year mark lies in the silent choice between passivity in the face of a diagnosis and aggressive defense of biological integrity. Often, the fundamental error is not the presence of a genetic predisposition, but the adoption of common habits that act as invisible accelerators of systemic decline, such as intellectual sedentary behavior and metabolic neglect. The problem worsens when the individual begins treating isolated symptoms with pills instead of attacking the roots of inflammation and insulin resistance that corrode their internal structure. This fragmented approach creates a false sense of security, while the organism loses day after day the capacity for self-regulation and cellular repair needed to sustain extreme longevity. It is in this struggle between the convenience of the immediate and the effort of prevention that the future of your health is decided. What is truly at stake in this scenario of biological choices is your personal sovereignty and the maintenance of your power of decision over your own routine. The absence of an active practice of muscle strengthening and neurological protection puts your basic mobility at risk, transforming simple tasks into Herculean and dangerous challenges. When lucidity and motor capacity begin to fail due to accumulated errors, the individual stops being the protagonist of their story to become a logistical burden for their loved ones. The fear of losing identity through dementia or physical freedom should serve as a wake-up call for the urgency of acting while there is still total control. Preserving these 5 pillars of health at 60 is the only guarantee that you will not just be a passive survivor, but someone who fully enjoys their existence. The first fundamental pillar for those who wish to cross the 60-year barrier with power is absolute mastery over metabolic health, specifically the prevention of metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes. When your body loses the ability to manage sugar and insulin efficiently, excess glucose in the blood begins to act literally as if it were ground glass circulating inside your most delicate arteries. This silent process of destruction is not limited to an altered number on a blood test. It corrodes the structure of your kidneys, compromises the health of your eyes, and destroys the peripheral nerve endings that guarantee your sensitivity. Ignoring this failure in energy management is to accept that your organism suffers a brutal acceleration of systemic aging, transforming a powerful machine into a fragile, inflamed system incapable of sustaining extreme longevity. The consequences of allowing diabetes to settle are devastating and often lead to amputations, blindness, and chronic kidney failure, stealing your independence in a cruel and progressive way. On the other hand, by correcting your metabolic flexibility through conscious choices, you guarantee stable energy and total preservation of your microvasculature, which is the life distribution network for every cell. A healthy metabolism works as the basal engine that allows your organism to operate at high performance even after decades of use, being the primary requirement for reaching 100 years. If you are following this journey and realize the importance of protecting your biology, leave a comment below saying which pillar concerns you most today and take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, joining a community that seeks real control over its own aging. The second critical pillar concerns cardiovascular collapse, manifested through heart attack and stroke, conditions resulting from the chronic hardening and clogging of your oxygen transport routes. Over the years, the circulatory system tends to lose its natural elasticity, but this process is drastically accelerated by plaque deposits that reduce blood perfusion in the brain and heart. When oxygenation fails, decline is not just a medical statistic, but a direct threat to your ability to think, move, and exist without external help. Ignoring the health of your arteries is like allowing the main roads of your body to be blocked, preventing vital nutrients from reaching the organs that keep you alive and functional. Maintaining an intact cardiovascular system is the only way to ensure that your motor and cognitive autonomy remains intact. Surviving a major cardiovascular event without proper prevention often means facing an existence marked by severe paralysis, loss of speech, and physical dependence that arises from one second to the next. However, by acting preventively to keep your blood vessels clean and flexible, you preserve your capacity for effort and ensure that your brain continues to be fed by a constant flow of oxygenated blood. A strong heart is not just for pumping blood. It is the guarantor that all other systems in your body will continue to operate at their maximum functional capacity. By protecting your vascular network, you ward off the risk of sudden death, and build the necessary mechanical foundation for a long, active life free from physical limitations imposed by obstructions that could have been avoided with discipline and strategic knowledge. The third pillar, often neglected until tragedy occurs, is the fight against the structural failure represented by severe sarcopenia and osteoporosis. This process consists of the accelerated melting of your muscle mass and bone mineralization, transforming your skeleton, which should be a rigid support, into a fragile and brittle structure like glass. Without the muscular armor to protect your joints and absorb impacts, the body becomes extremely vulnerable to falls that, for a young person, would be trivial, but for someone over 60 can be fatal. Muscle loss is not just an aesthetic issue of sagging, it is the loss of the engine that allows you to get up from a chair, walk safely, and maintain the balance necessary to navigate the world with confidence. Muscle must be understood as an endocrine organ vital to your mechanical survival. A femur fracture resulting from a simple fall is, statistically, the beginning of an accelerated decline that often leads to permanent immobility and serious respiratory complications in the elderly. By investing in strengthening your physical structure, you acquire impeccable balance and the functional strengths needed to avoid these domestic accidents that destroy lives in a matter of seconds. Correcting bone density and muscle mass ensures that you maintain an upright posture and motor agility, allowing old age to be lived with the freedom of movement you enjoyed decades ago. Muscle is the main predictor of longevity as it protects the skeletal system and regulates various metabolic processes that keep the body young. Cultivating this strength is ensuring that you never become a prisoner of your own physical frailty, maintaining sovereignty over every step you decide to take. The fourth pillar focuses on neurodegenerative decline, encompassing Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia that are driven by the accumulation of toxic proteins and the progressive atrophy of brain tissue. This condition attacks the core of your existence, disconnecting you from the present and gradually erasing your memories, your personality, and your ability to perform the most basic daily tasks. The mind, once brilliant and agile, begins to fail silently, creating a chasm between who you were and who you are becoming, which generates deep suffering for both the individual and their family. Ignoring brain health and accepting forgetfulness as something natural is to allow your identity to dissolve while your body still breathes. Prevention here is not just about memory, but about the preservation of consciousness, which is the most precious asset we possess as we age. Maintaining sharp lucidity and the ability to learn new things even at 90 is one of the greatest triumphs a human being can achieve in old age. By adopting strategies that protect your neurons and promote neuroplasticity, you ensure that your intellect remains a powerful tool for interaction with the world, allowing you to continue being a source of wisdom for the next generations. Physically surviving to 100 years loses all meaning if there is no preservation of consciousness and recognition of those we love, making neurological health the pillar that sustains the purpose of longevity. A well-cared-for brain is resilient to the attacks of time and keeps intellectual curiosity alive, warding off the risk of social isolation and institutionalization. Protecting your mind is the ultimate act of respect for your own history and the dignity you have built throughout your entire life. The fifth crucial pillar for achieving extreme longevity is protection against cancer, focusing especially on preventive forms directly related to lifestyle and the inflammatory environment. The emergence of neoplasms often occurs due to the immune system's failure to detect and destroy cells that have undergone dangerous mutations, a process fueled by obesity and chronic inflammation. Cancer voraciously consumes the body's vital energy and requires extremely aggressive treatments that can rapidly deteriorate an organism already facing the natural challenges of aging. Neglecting warning signs and maintaining habits that attack DNA opens the doors to early physical wasting that abruptly interrupts dreams and projects. Keeping immunity robust and the biological terrain clean is essential for your body to remain a hostile environment for the development of tumor cells. Escaping oncological diseases is a statistical necessity for anyone aiming to reach the extreme zones of human longevity with quality of life. By prioritizing the integrity of your genetic material through proper cellular nutrition and control of oxidative stress, you strengthen the natural defenses that keep your body in balance. The benefits of maintaining a vigilant immune system are immense, allowing you to cross the decades with a resilience that many young people do not possess, preserving your vitality to enjoy the freedom you have earned. Cancer should not be seen as just a fatality, but as a condition whose probability can be drastically reduced through an active and vigilant stance on your own biological health. Shielding yourself against this predator is ensuring that your trajectory toward 100 years is not interrupted by an internal failure that could have been prevented with intelligence and constant discipline. The perfect integration of these 5 pillars creates an impenetrable barrier that separates the elderly who merely survive from those who truly thrive in their maximum power. By mastering your metabolism, protecting your heart, strengthening your structure, preserving your mind, and monitoring your immunity, you build what we call a biological passport to extreme longevity. Each of these pillars does not work in isolation. They are deeply interconnected, where the failure in one can trigger a domino effect that compromises your entire health structure. Understanding this web of biological interdependencies is what allows you to stop being a victim of circumstances and become the master of your own aging. This is not just a list of medical precautions, but a manifesto of sovereignty for those who refuse the mediocrity of frailty and choose to fight for a life marked by autonomy, dignity, and absolute control. Consider the story of Jorge, who at 60 ignored constant tiredness and loss of strength, believing them to be just marks of time. A small trip on the living room rug resulted in a devastating femur fracture, triggering a domino effect of hospitalizations and the permanent loss of his motor autonomy. In contrast, we have Helena, who upon noticing the first signs of insulin resistance, decided to transform her routine with strength exercises and rigorous metabolic monitoring. Today, at 85, Helena not only walks unaided but travels alone and carries her great-grandchildren with a vitality that impresses even the youngest. These real trajectories demonstrate that decline is not an obligatory fate, but often the result of ignored signals or an active stance of biological defense that guarantees control over future decades. Aging should not be seen as a random process or a genetic lottery where some are selected with vigor and others with extreme frailty. In fact, every cell in your body responds to a silent accumulation of stimuli you have provided over decades, transforming small daily habits into large structural impacts. Physical and mental decline does not happen suddenly, like a switch being turned off, but rather as a progressive erosion that can be slowed down or even stabilized if there is conscious intervention. Understanding that the body is a dynamic biological structure and not a machine doomed to scrap completely changes your perception of time. Old age is, ultimately, the harvest of biological intelligence applied during the years of maturity, where every choice of movement or nutrition acts as an investment in your future sovereignty and in the maintenance of your personal dignity. Although the weight of these 5 diseases may seem like a dark sentence hanging over your future, the scientific truth is that your body is endowed with a capacity for regeneration and adaptation that does not end at 60. The fear of losing autonomy is a legitimate biological warning, but it should serve only as the fuel for your immediate and conscious transformation. For every blood vessel that threatens to clog, there is a dietary change capable of restoring endothelial health. For every muscle that seems to wither, there is the stimulus of strength training that can reverse sarcopenia in a matter of months. It is never too late to retake the reins of your biology, as small changes in your daily routine generate deep and real impacts on your functional life expectancy. Old age can be strengthened with strategy, intelligence, and the courage to act now. If you choose to ignore these 5 fundamental pillars today, the future holds a scenario of frailty that no one voluntarily wants to face as they age. The lack of preventive action inevitably leads to the progressive loss of mobility, transforming your own home into a labyrinth of dangerous and limiting obstacles to your freedom of movement. Cognitive decline silences your voice in family decisions, while physical dependence requires the constant presence of caregivers, taking away the control over your most basic and intimate routine. Frequent hospitalizations become the new norm, consuming your savings and your joy of living in the cold corridors of health institutions. In contrast, he who assumes biological responsibility now enjoys an old age guided by absolute sovereignty, maintaining the strength to walk alone, the clear mind to manage his assets, and the dignity of never becoming a logistical burden for his children. Perhaps the most surprising revelation about aging is the fact that physical decline is not an inevitable slope, but a biological choice that many make without realizing the gravity of the future consequences. While most people focus exclusively on avoiding cholesterol or high blood pressure, the most ignored item is the silent loss of muscle mass, which acts as the true engine of your longevity. Contrary to popular belief, muscle is a sophisticated endocrine organ that regulates your immunity and protects your brain against decline. If you have made it this far, it is because you value your autonomy. Consider sharing this video with family members who need to wake up to this reality. Discovering that you can have the strength of a young person even at 70 is the turning point that transforms fear into absolute power and renews your hope. To transform this knowledge into real power, you must begin by observing the subtle signals your body emits daily, such as the ease of getting up from a chair without using your hands, or mental clarity upon waking. A simple and non-negotiable action is to elevate strength training to the status of a medical prescription. It is not about aesthetics, but about building the muscular armor needed to protect your bones and maintain your absolute motor autonomy. Additionally, replace basic routine exams with a deep screening that looks at markers of inflammation and insulin resistance, allowing for precise adjustments in your nutrition. In daily life, challenge your intellect with activities that require real cognitive effort, escaping the passivity of cell phone screens. By monitoring your blood pressure and body composition, you take control of your trajectory, ensuring that simple changes translate into decades of full vitality. As we reach the end of this journey, it is clear that the 60-year barrier is not a full stop, but the definitive testing ground for your biological intelligence. We have seen that the absence of these 5 chronic conditions is not the result of chance or luck, but the outcome of an aggressive defense of metabolic and neurological integrity that you build with every decision. The true metric of success in aging is the maintenance of your sovereignty, ensuring that the coming decades are guided by the power of choice, by lucidity, and by absolute physical independence. If you wish to be an elite elder, start today to look at your body as a territory to be protected against any sign of frailty. Which of these 5 areas do you feel needs more attention now? Leave your reflection in the comments. Subscribe to keep evolving, and share this video with those you love. To consolidate your biological shield, the final pillar requires active vigilance against the emergence of mutant cells and the wear and tear of the immune system, factors that pave the way for devastating oncological conditions. Cancer should not be viewed as a tragic genetic lottery, but as a process often driven by inflamed and metabolically unstable bodily environments that can be corrected with discipline and awareness. By investing in nutrition rich in bioactive compounds and maintaining rigorous control of visceral fat, you create a biological terrain hostile to tumor growth and preserve your vital energy for the decades to come. This final protection ensures that your trajectory toward 100 years does not suffer abrupt interruptions, allowing you to enjoy the harvest of all other efforts made. With your structure, mind, heart, and metabolism protected, you achieve definitive sovereignty, transforming longevity into a living testimony of power, health, and absolute victory over time.